Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, April the 15th, 2025. So yesterday, Monday, April the 14th, was the 160th anniversary of President Abraham Lincoln's assassination. In fact, if you're watching this video on Monday the 14th, it is the day of Abraham Lincoln's assassination. So I thought this would be an opportunity to look at Abraham Lincoln's horoscope and also to ask the question, why was he vulnerable on April the 14th, 1865? Was he going through a bad patch? And I do want to make a small comparison between Abraham Lincoln and Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump has actually compared himself to Abraham Lincoln, and that might suggest that Donald Trump regards himself as one of America's greatest presidents. I mean, who else are they? There's Abraham Lincoln and George Washington and Roosevelt. If you're perhaps more on the left, you might regard Franklin Delano Roosevelt as one of the best American presidents. If you're more on the right, you might go for Ronald Reagan. But then, what about Donald Trump? Now, you might think that is ridiculous, comparing Donald Trump with Abraham Lincoln. I mean, if you are one of those people that can't stand Donald Trump. But Donald Trump has made this comparison. I mean, Donald Trump knows more about the presidency, certainly than me. And so I assume he knows what he's talking about. And so I kind of wanted to consider this question. What is the comparison between Donald Trump and Abraham Lincoln? And I do think there is a comparison. I think there is an important way in which Donald Trump and Abraham Lincoln can be linked. We have to be quite objective about this, but I think it's something we need to explore. I mean, I have hinted at it in a previous video, and it does connect with Neptune in Aries. But before I look at Abraham Lincoln and Donald Trump, I'm not going to spend too much time on Donald Trump, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Tuesday, April the 15th. By the way, if you like this video, I'd be very happy if you were to indicate that you liked it. And if you're not subscribed and you do want to subscribe, well, feel free. So here is the chart of today, set for noon. You can see it's Tuesday, April the 15th, 2025. And set for noon, we've got the moon in late Scorpio. So, that means that for most of us, all day long, the moon is going to be in Scorpio. So if you are in the Americas, then this evening, the moon will move into Sagittarius. But really, that's happening very, very late in the day. So the moon is in the last half of Scorpio. It's out of the via combustor, so we don't have that craziness that we sometimes associate with the moon in early Scorpio. So there may be a certain amount of stability today, in the sense that things could be relatively predictable, though we do have to consider some of the aspects that the moon is making. So the moon is making an opposition to Uranus. So I think that might suggest that there are limits to how predictable today is going to be. While we haven't got the kind of via combustor events, things completely happening out of the blue, which we weren't planning on, which mess up our plans. Instead, moon opposition Uranus, that can indicate a little bit of conflict, and there's not a lot of room for compromise with moon opposition Uranus. Moon in Scorpio, opposition Uranus in Taurus, in fixed signs, people being set in their ways, and there doesn't seem to be any middle ground. So we have to ask ourselves, what do we do in such a situation? Is it really worth hanging on? Are there things that we are so obsessed about that we have to risk arguments, disagreements, or maybe it's something that we can give a little bit of ground? And the moon is not just making an opposition to Uranus; it's making a trine to these Pisces planets in particular. It's making a trine to Saturn, and it's making a trine to the Venus-Saturn conjunction. So Moon trine Venus is an aspect that is quite good for relationships, and it allows people to get on with each other on an emotional level. And Moon trine Saturn does suggest that things aren't going to get completely out of hand. So the moon makes opposition to Uranus, then straight away it makes a trine to Saturn. So that Saturn might be a moderating influence. And as far as the non-lunar aspects are concerned, we have the Sun at 25 Aries making a semi-sextile to Uranus, which is at 25 Taurus, and making a semi-sextile to Saturn. So like the beginning of the day, Sun semi-sextile Uranus, end of the day, Sun semi-sextile Saturn. And if you separate those two aspects out, well, Sun semi-sextile Uranus is about trying to take the initiative, but having to deal with something that we may find a little bit disturbing, represented by Uranus in Taurus, and that could be surprising intransigence by another person. Another person really wants to stick to their guns regardless. And that is one way of looking at Sun semi-sextile Uranus. And then you've got Sun semi-sextile Saturn, and that's kind of easier to understand. Sun in Aries, again, the active element here, wanting to make things happen, but having to deal with Saturn. There are restrictions on our freedom of action, or at least that's how it feels to begin with. But this is Sun semi-sextile Saturn. It's not Sun square Saturn, or even Sun opposition Saturn. It's therefore a situation where we have to understand the limitations on our freedom and respect those limitations, and at the same time do what we have to do. It's not about being frustrated and giving up on something because it's just too much effort. It's about changing our approach, perhaps being more responsible or more thoughtful. But there is a way. And because the Sun is making a semi-sextile to Saturn and the Sun is making a semi-sextile to Uranus, we can then say that the Sun is on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. So Sun, Saturn, Uranus is quite a tense midpoint. Saturn and Uranus, you imagine those planets coming together. Saturn, Uranus is about, we want change, but we are also very aware of everything stopping us creating change. And that does make us feel very tense. And Sun in Aries on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, getting maybe annoyed and getting frustrated. Easy to get frustrated. But we shouldn't let it get to us. There is a way. And so that's the viewpoint from the perspective of New York. So if we move the focus to Sydney, Australia, of course, just being a representative of the East Asia, Australia, New Zealand, New Guinea, maybe, if you happen to be in New Guinea. I don't know if anyone has ever visited this site from New Guinea. So in Sydney, Australia, the moon is at noon on April the 15th. The moon is just earlier in the sign, and so you can see that the moon is early Scorpio. It's only just starting to make those trines with Venus and Saturn. So if you are in Sydney, Australia, or Australasia in general, probably going to be a slower day than if you're in the Americas or Europe. Things may take more time to develop, and so it's important that you're not impatient. And even that Moon and Uranus opposition that I was talking about, it's 7 degrees apart, so that Moon Uranus opposition isn't really going to happen until the end of the day. So I would have said a quieter day in Australia and New Zealand than in, say, the United States, for example. And heliocentrically, here it is. Here is the heliocentric view. We've still got Earth opposition Chiron in the same way that we've still got Sun conjunct Chiron. I don't want to say anything really much else about it, but it kind of fits in with this image today of perhaps the frustrated rebel. Sun on the geocentrically, Sun conjunct the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, feeling we want to do something, but also being very aware of the restrictions upon us. But where there is a will, there's a way. And because the Sun is on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, well, not because, it's not always, but it doesn't always completely line up. But in this case, in this case, the Earth is on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. So we've got the Sun pretty close to the Saturn-Uranus midpoint geocentrically. Heliocentrically, we've got Earth on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint. So that really does emphasize the Saturn-Uranus principle that I was talking about. Really feeling that we want something to happen and just feeling incredibly frustrated about it. And it's not just us. It's everything around us. It's the world. It's how people are behaving. And events in the world. We're just waiting for a resolution. We're hoping for a resolution, but is there going to be a resolution? Well, not necessarily. And Pluto is conjunct the Mars-Jupiter midpoint. You can see that by eye. If you look, there's Mars, there's Jupiter, so you can see that the midpoint of Mars and Jupiter is going to be roughly sort of early Leo. So Pluto is opposition the Mars-Jupiter midpoint, and so it is quite dramatic there. Mars-Jupiter is about action, the desire for action, people wanting things to happen, people not holding back, and that might be the general attitude. People are not happy with the status quo. They want change, and they want it now. And another midpoint is Uranus on the opposition, Uranus opposition the Mercury-Venus midpoint. Again, that's an aspect it's quite easy to see. There's Mercury and Venus. And there's Uranus. So Uranus on the Mercury-Venus midpoint, possibly more constructive. Mercury-Venus as a pair, very talented. There's a lot that Mercury-Venus can do, a lot they're able to do. And Uranus on the Mercury-Venus midpoint may give some of us a chance to, to do something really special, really spectacular, that really, shows off our talents. So that's something we should consider doing. So if, for example, today you're feeling really frustrated and you can't make things happen, then don't force it. Don't feel that you have to use huge amounts of energy. Instead, consider the possibility that you can use your intelligence to sort the problem out, using your brain power, and also using the full toolbox of your many and various abilities. So that's a heliocentric picture, and now I'm going to look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, April the 15th, 2025. Aries. Aries, you are holding something back. You're not fully able to give it everything. because you may be concerned about the consequences, and you are possibly, taking things more seriously than usual. There are things going on which you need to look at and you need to understand. And Aries, it is not actually a time when you should be just taking things at face value. What things seem to be on the surface is not actually what they necessarily are. So Aries, it's important that you're prepared to ask questions and look at things from a different perspective, and do try to get deeper, because surface appearances at the moment don't tell you very much. And if you are thoughtful and you don't jump to conclusions, then I do think that you're going to be able to navigate the day successfully. I mean, you could jump to conclusions. The moon is opposition Uranus, and that moon opposition Uranus might encourage you to reach rapid conclusions about things that things that feel important to you. For example, money might be one thing that you reach a rapid conclusion about. But if you do find yourself coming to a rapid conclusion, it's absolutely possible that you've jumped the gun, that actually there isn't so much to be concerned about, and you do need to ask a few more questions. And the moon in late Scorpio makes aspects to Venus and Saturn, and that Moon-Venus aspect, that Moon-Venus trine, actually it gives you the ability to be quite charming. And if you do make the effort, you can really get people to like you. You have to make the effort, though. If you just act on impulse, then I don't think that's really going to be appreciated. But if you're ready to be a little more circumspect and to pause and allow your inner emotional thermometer to gauge what's going on, then you'll be able to act in a way that's appropriate and actually thoughtful and sensitive. Might not feel like it, but put in the effort and really try to understand other people. And I think that would be would I think be very useful. Though I am not saying that you don't have the ability to assert yourself. You very much do. And if you're not happy about things and you really feel that something has to give, well, feel free. Well, I don't quite say feel free. You do have to consider the situation. But it may be the case that if you know what you're able to do, and you have the absolute confidence to know that you can make changes, then you're going to be more relaxed, and then you may not feel the necessity to blow up. I mean, you could blow up, but I don't think that would always be a good idea. And Aries, just don't forget, the sun is still in your sign. This continues, to put you in a position where you're fairly unassailable if you handle things right. It's just that just today might require a little more thought. Now, very late this evening, the moon moves into Sagittarius, which is a fire sign. And well, if you're in the Americas, late this evening, the moon moves into Sagittarius, and that might shift things. It might make you feel more confident and less introspective. And as you move into tomorrow, as you move into Wednesday, the moon has more and more of an impact in Sagittarius. But that's something that really I need to discuss when I look at your horoscope for tomorrow, which is Wednesday. Taurus. Taurus, you are going to be quite capable today. Capable in the sense that you're able to be yourself, but you're able to be yourself in a way that is, or can be, in a way that can be very, very sympathetic, and people might like you today. That's not to say that it's guaranteed, and you do have a choice. You've always got choices. But if you make it your business to get people onto your side and to understand them, then I do think that you can be pretty successful. I mean, after all, the moon is making a trine to Venus, which is your ruler, and it's also making a trine to Saturn, and that is really a very stabilizing force, and you may find a way of living with people. It might have been hard, and there may have been times where you felt somewhat frustrated, but you have an awareness of what people are for and what you can do for them. And so if you handle things in the right way, then I think that relationships can work very well. And it's important that you don't get too obsessed about your own ego and your own individuality. You need to be confident about that. And of course, what I'm really talking about is an opposition between the moon and Uranus. So that is one of the aspects today. You've got moon in Scorpio, opposition Uranus in Taurus. And that Uranus in Taurus does highlight your individuality. And of course, Uranus is not going to be in Taurus forever. Very soon it will be starting to move into Gemini. I think it retrogrades back into Taurus, but it is quite close to the end of Taurus, and you may feel that you do have to make it clear who you are and who you're not, and you might want to really make it clear what your agenda is, and that's certainly an option. But I'm not convinced that you should necessarily take that option. You certainly can be very disruptive today if you really want to be. But just because you feel that your freedom is being limited doesn't mean you have to make a big fuss about it. And it's possible that you could either just not worry about what's going on, not put a high premium on your freedom. I mean, okay, there are certain things you have to put a high premium on. You don't want to be in a situation where you're being taken advantage of. But freedom for the sake of freedom is not very helpful. Also, if you can be clever and diplomatic, you can take into account other people's needs and wishes, and at the same time look after your own needs for self-expression. And so you can actually get the best of both worlds. I mean, it will require a bit of effort and a bit of subtlety. Now, sometimes Taurus can be actually very unsubtle, and a word that I sometimes use with Taurus is blunt. Yeah, Taurians can be blunt, and today it's unnecessary to be blunt because the moon is trine Venus. You have sufficient subtlety to get around being blunt, and at the same time also you can kind of get your way, but yeah, you have to be diplomatic about it. And as far as your own perceptions and how you're thinking about the world, I would encourage you to be as positive as possible. I mean, when you look at things at first sight, you might feel that things really aren't working your way, and you might be aware of everything that might be holding you back, but it would be so unnecessary. because if you give yourself a chance to be positive, you can be positive, and this positivity can be reflected in just the whole way you express yourself. And if you make a special effort to look on the bright side of life, then you can transmit that enthusiasm to other people, even if at first it doesn't completely ring home. But then it becomes like a feedback loop, and if other people are feeling good, then you feel good. And so you can actually not just make other people feel great, but you can actually start to feel great yourself, and you can start to be aware about everything that is possible. And that's what you need at the moment, with Venus still making a conjunction to Saturn. Venus conjunct Saturn is a difficult aspect. It's still there. In fact, Venus is starting to get closer to Saturn now that Venus is now direct. Venus is moving forward. I don't know about the relative speeds, but Venus is, that angular distance between Venus and Saturn will very soon start to close, and at some stage between now and the end of the month, Venus will make that conjunction to Saturn, and that can make you feel a little bit negative and be aware of restrictions. But right now you can get over those restrictions, and you can start to look at the future, and the future, if you're honest with yourself, looks good. Gemini, like yesterday, it does feel as if there is some work to be done. There's work still to be done, and it might not be especially interesting, but if you concentrate, then I think that you can make real progress. And like yesterday, it's important that you are not disturbed, and also you're going to be quite tough with yourself, because you're going to want results, and you're going to want to create change, and you're going to want to create change like now. And the question then might be, well, can you do it? Well, I think actually you can do it if you're undisturbed, or if you're getting a high level of cooperation. And can you get that cooperation? Probably, yes, you can. I mean, the moon is making a trine to Venus, and so that trine for you, Gemini, is quite focused on your desires, and also whatever it is you're trying to achieve. Now that could be in your work if you're working, or it just could be whatever you're trying to get together. And so there could be quite a lot of cooperation. And yeah, if you are going into work today, then I actually think that you can get quite a lot done, and you can get support. It may not be 100% easy to get that support, and perhaps what you have to do is just set an example. You do what you feel is necessary, and sooner or later you get help, but maybe that help won't be immediately available. Now, one thing about Mercury is that Mercury is now absolutely in the last degree of Pisces, and it's getting ready to make that change into Aries. Tomorrow, Wednesday, Mercury moves into Aries. I think I've got that right. 16th, Mercury moves into Aries. So that's happening. In fact, if you're in California, it's late tonight that Mercury moves into Aries. So for you, that is a big change, and it's a change which, as I think I said yesterday, is something that is fortunate. And so what today should be about is preparation. You're putting in the work, and you're trying to make things right, because very soon there'll be an opportunity to really take advantage of it all. So just because what you're doing right now seems a little bit pointless doesn't mean it's going to be pointless for very long. And so if you're properly prepared, Mercury moving into Aries, can be a great time for you. But Mercury, does make a conjunction to Neptune once it moves into Aries. So you've got to be realistic, and you've got to be well prepared. So you could say that a lot of what you're doing now is a preparation for some of the uncertainty and confusion of the immediate future. But if you know what's going on and you've done enough research, then you'll be okay. You'll be able to get through and really take advantage of whatever is happening around you. Cancer moon is still in late Scorpio. It does move into Sagittarius this evening if you're in the Americas, but I would have said it's a moon in Scorpio day, and moon is in a good position. It's in mutual reception to Mars, and this is, as I said yesterday, do take advantage of the moon being in Scorpio and being in mutual reception to Mars. Next time moon is in Scorpio, it won't be in mutual reception to Mars, because Mars will have changed sign, because Mars is on the verge of moving into Leo. And so you have an opportunity here to really, Cancer, to make things happen, and you can benefit from other people, because the moon is making a trine to Venus, and it is also making a trine to Saturn, and Venus is starting to make a conjunction to Saturn. Venus is conjunct Saturn, and that means, Cancer, you don't have to be alone. You don't have to sort everything out all by yourself and sort things out. Well, you don't really have to sort things out. Moon in Scorpio for you, Cancer, it's a time when you are really feeling good about yourself. You should be feeling good about yourself. You should really be trying your hardest to feel good, because things are going your way, and you should be having a powerful insight into what you can do and what you're going to be able to do in the near future. And so be as positive as possible. And the moon is not just in mutual reception to Mars, but it's actually making a trine to Mars. So the exact trine to Mars might not be until tomorrow, but it's getting there. And the moon, so what the moon does, if you track it through, is that the moon makes a trine to Venus, it makes a trine to Saturn, and then it makes a trine to Mars. So, and of course, Venus and Mars are kind of in trine to each other. They're about 4 degrees apart from that trine. So. And that may say something about relationships and you and other people and how you get on with other people. And this may be a chance to really move certain relationships to a new level, through your own efforts. And it's all relative. It all depends what someone can give you, what you are looking for, what the nature of a relationship is. And so every relationship has natural limitations. You've got to be aware of those limitations. But the relationships that you're currently involved with, you can make the most of them, whatever those relationships are about. And so do really try, when it comes to dealing with other people, try to make the most of them, because you have a lot to offer, and also certain people have a lot to offer. Just because someone has got a lot to offer doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily always be able to benefit, and it just may be that you have to pull the right strings and maybe press the right buttons. But as a Cancer, that is something you can do. You're someone who is very, very sensitive and in tune, and if you make the effort, you can just you can understand what people are, who people are. Sometimes you can be overly suspicious. Sometimes it's actually good to be suspicious, but maybe you need to get through your doubts and your suspicions and just look at the human material around you and really make the most of it. And other people can, they can in certain ways take you to a new level, and that's perhaps what you should be striving for. With these planets in Pisces, this concentration in Pisces, well, it's starting to break up, because we've got, we might have Venus, Saturn, and Mercury in Pisces, but Mercury is about to leave Pisces. Tomorrow Mercury will be in Aries, and that will be something different. And so, by tomorrow there'll only be Venus and Saturn in Pisces. But while you've got planets in Pisces, Cancer, it's a time to elevate yourself and to see what is possible, and to see what you can do, and take things as far as you can to a new level. And you can do that maybe with other people's help. So don't underestimate yourself, and don't underestimate the human beings around you. Leo, the sun is your ruler, so a lot of focus on your sun. We always need to know what's going on with the sun, and we already know that the sun is in Aries, and the sun is coming to the end of Aries. It's not going to be there forever, and the sun is exalted. And so, in general, Leo, this is a time of year when you have opportunity, when you may well be on best form, and the sun is making a few aspects. The sun, it's still making that conjunction to Chiron, and with that sun conjunct Chiron, you still have the opportunity to be an individual and to, be open and honest about who you are and what you want. And additionally, the sun is making two semisextiles. It makes a semisextile to Uranus, and it makes a semisextile to Saturn. And those two semisextiles could be problematic. That is the nature of a semisextile aspect. The semisextile emphasizes the difference between two planets, because semisextile in its pure form is about two planets being in adjacent signs. So Sun in Aries, semisextile Uranus in Taurus. That means that you, Sun in Aries, lots of stuff you want to do. You want to be spontaneous, but you've got to take into account Uranus in Taurus. Uranus in Taurus represents something you hadn't thought about. It represents the capriciousness of human nature. People doing things or having attitudes that you hadn't really allowed for. And this would especially be the case if you're dealing with people who have authority and power. They have their way of doing things, and it doesn't necessarily line up with your approach. At least that might be how it feels. And then the Sun is making a semisextile to Saturn, and it's a similar picture. Saturn can also be about restriction. Uranus in itself is not about restriction. I think in this context it could be about restriction. Someone else's stubbornness, Uranus in Taurus, making it a little bit difficult for you to do everything you want to do. And then Sun, semisextile Saturn, yeah, that is about having to deal with things you don't want to do. That Sun sextile Saturn could be internal. It could have an emotional nature. It's about your maybe inhibitions or your worries. There might be a psychological element to it. So it's true that the Sun is in Aries, but because it's on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, by definition, it's making a semi-sextile to Saturn, making a semi-sextile to Uranus. Saturn and Uranus are in sextile to each other, so the Sun is right between them, and so that does make you potentially feel today rather frustrated. You want things to happen, and you want to make an impression, and there seem to be forces beyond your control stopping you doing everything you want to do. But semi-sextiles have a constructive element to them. They're not like squares or oppositions. There is a way to get round it. So you have to work with the limitations, work with the unpredictability of certain other people, work with it all and find a way through. And Leo, I really do think that you can find a way through. And also, with that Sun semi-sextile Saturn, that may say something about relationships and about how you and another person relate to one another. And you may be aware of the fundamental differences, that you really have a different approach, at least at the moment. And it might be someone who is perhaps more introspective than you, or also it could be someone who seems to be brooding, or they seem to be distracted by something, and just perhaps being over emotional, and it just doesn't feel entirely comfortable. But because of that Sun semi-sextile Saturn, there does seem, Leo, to be a way round it, a way you can accommodate it. And so perhaps the Sun semi-sextile Saturn is asking you not just to be more responsible, but to be more accommodating, to understand that different people have different perspectives, and if you can respect another person's perspective and also have an appreciation of the things bothering them, then in the end there might be the chance of finding new connections, and perhaps an interpersonal issue which at the beginning of the day seems rather intractable can perhaps be resolved, or at least you can move forward, and there can be a greater sense of understanding. Virgo, Mercury, don't forget, is really, really close to leaving Pisces, really close. And tomorrow Mercury will be out of Pisces and into Aries. In fact, this evening, certainly if you're in California, late this evening, Mercury will be out of Pisces and into Aries. So there is a change happening, and with Mercury moving into Aries, you have you have a chance to be more dynamic and also more intense. I think that can be a feature of Mercury moving into Aries, but that's something I'll be talking about tomorrow when I look at the fuller implications of that sign change. As far as today is concerned, Mercury is still in Pisces, maybe delicately placed in Pisces, because it's reasonably close to that fixed star Skeet, the planet that's the fixed star of accidents and disasters. Now, that doesn't mean to say there are going to be accidents and disasters for Virgos, but you just know that things have to be taken seriously, and you can't do everything that you want. And where is the disaster waiting to happen? Well, the disaster waiting to happen might be other people. It's just wherever you are. wherever you are where you're not aware of the rules, especially if you're on another person's territory. So if you are somewhere you don't understand, where where someone else is making the decisions, then things could go wrong, things could appear to go wrong. And so with Mercury about to leave Pisces, maybe you need to just have some caution, not do anything new. Today is absolutely not actually a time for doing anything new or experimenting for adventures. Absolutely not, because it's not a time for learning a new set of rules or trying to work out a new situation, because you haven't got time. And in your rush to try to understand what is appropriate behavior, you might actually behave inappropriately, or perhaps someone else will behave inappropriately. So in general, I would have said, start to take it easy and don't just follow your impulses. You are at the moment feeling you would like a big change. You're ready for change, absolutely ready, and you possibly want that change to happen, right now. But if you want Tuesday to be an impactful, dramatic day, then you might get what you want, but I don't think you'd be happy with the results. So Virgo, try to restrain yourself, and don't take on too much, and don't be controversial. There is no need to be controversial. And so what you can do is you can almost appease people. There is actually a grand trine kind of today, which I haven't really discussed. I should have mentioned it, but I didn't. And so you might be one of the only signs that I'm mentioning this grand trine too. And so this grand trine is about Mars, Venus, and the Moon. So the Moon is in Scorpio, and it's making a trine to Venus, and then it makes a trine to Mars. And that trine between the Moon and Mars, well, it may not happen until late this evening or into tomorrow, but it does mean that you're in a position where you can facilitate communication in general, especially on an emotional level. And it's not that you're looking for anything dramatic. It's just all about people understanding each other, and you know what to say and you know what not to say if you're honest with yourself, and if you do listen to your feelings, because the Moon making a trine to Venus, it's a very pleasant trine to Venus, and then it's restrained by the Moon making a trine to Saturn, and then it moves on to make the trine to Mars. So you actually can be very subtle today if you want to be, and you'll know exactly how to behave. And so if you're a Virgoan diplomat, then you can actually do a good job. It's just important not to be tempted and not to be distracted. Moon does make an opposition to Uranus, and Moon opposition Uranus might encourage you to jump to conclusions or to say something because you just feel you don't have a choice, but you always have a choice. So just because you want to say something dramatic or go somewhere that sounds like a good place to go to, just because you have those feelings doesn't mean that you should give in to those feelings. I think you have to be firm and you have to be disciplined, and if you can do that, then you can get through the day. And what you're really doing is you're perhaps saving things up. So there are a lot of things you want to do, there's a lot of things you want to say, and you just know, if you're honest with yourself, that now is not quite the right time. And tomorrow it will be easier. You'll just have a greater understanding of what you need to do, and it will just be easier to be natural. And so, don't feel that anything absolutely has to happen, and just tune into your feelings, and get ready for Mercury to move into Aries. Libra, Venus is still pretty close to the conjunction with Saturn. That's true. And at the moment, you're probably kind of getting used to it. It is a difficult energy, having, Venus, your ruler, conjunct Saturn, and you might feel that you're restrained and constrained, but as it's been going on for some time, you're working out how to deal with the situation, and you're starting to understand your limits. This Venus conjunct Saturn doesn't just happen to make things difficult for you. It happens so that you can learn some stuff, and I think that's probably what's happening. And you're finding it easier with the Moon making a trine to Venus, Moon making a trine to Saturn. You're finding it easier to see the opportunities, and what actually seemed to be a real problem, something absolutely holding you back, is now seen as something which is a manageable obstacle, or it could even be an opportunity. And today, Libra, you're actually very good at seeing opportunities and seeing possibilities which you perhaps hadn't seen before. And so if you make a real effort to see the opportunities, to see the possibilities, to tell yourself that, yeah, it can happen, that the sky is maybe the limit. And so it's essential, Libra, that you don't doubt yourself, and if something is available, then there may be a way that you can get your hands on it, even if you're not always feeling 100% confident. But you have to get through that lack of confidence, believe it is possible. And this could relate to anything. It could relate to other people, getting people to do things your way, having good and effective communications with people who may have been really difficult to deal with in the past. That may be how Venus conjunct Saturn is working. Feeling overwhelmed or overawed by another person. But now things are changing, and it maybe just because you're becoming familiar with the situation, and perhaps someone who was unapproachable not so long ago, you can now see a line of connection there. And the Moon is making a trine to Venus, and it's making a trine to Mars. Now that trine to Mars may not happen until tomorrow, but there's still the feeling that trine is getting closer. So with Moon trine Venus and Mars, this actually could be pretty good for relationships, and it just allows things to run quite smoothly. And this grand trine is in water signs, so it is about emotions and how your feelings manifest, and you're quite good at being able to read the room. You know what's going on, and even if no one is talking about it, and this really does allow you to act and speak in a way that is completely appropriate, and I think that people are going to respond very well to you. And it's just important that you don't have any doubts, and that you try as far as you possibly can to demonstrate confidence, because if you do believe in yourself, even if you have your doubts, if you still believe in yourself, then I think you can be surprised at what you can achieve and what you can make happen. And you shouldn't forget the financial dimension. The moon is moving through Scorpio. The moon is making a mutual reception to Mars. Venus is still trine Mars. Moon is aspecting Venus and Mars. So from a financial view, I would have said that today actually could be quite good, and it may go back to what I was saying about it being important to believe in yourself. If it's something you want, materially or financially, there does seem to be a real chance that you can get it, and you just have to use your feelings and work your way through various obstacles. And I think this is especially the case if it all requires someone else's approval or someone's agreement. And so if you're trying to get someone to do something for you of a financial nature, or to give you something, or to agree to give you more money, or to pay you, or whatever it is, then I think you will know how to behave, and you'll know what to say, you'll know what to ask for, and your subtlety could in the end be the key to financial success. Scorpio, today things are moving, and arguably we have a grand trine in water signs. And this grand trine involves the moon and Venus and Saturn and Mars. And so what we have is we've got moon in Scorpio moving through your sign, making a trine to Venus, making a trine to Saturn, trine to Mars, and in fact it's almost making a trine to Mercury. So Scorpio, it does seem that things are moving, and you just need to allow things to run their course, because they're running their course in your favour, and just make sure that you're not disrupted. Because one aspect that might spoil things is an opposition to Uranus. So we've got this aspect, moon in Taurus, moon in Scorpio, opposition Uranus in Taurus. And this aspect might say something about other people and how you treat other people, or rather how they treat you. And certain people may be unpredictable and unstable, and they may also be very stuck in their ways, and there may be moments in the day when it just does feel that things are stuck, that things aren't moving. And you might think, well, that's it. But there is this grand trine in water signs, and grand trine in water signs, things can move, and it's a water sign. It's like the tide. It just always finds a way of getting round obstacles, getting through obstacles. It seeps. It finds weak points, and that may be about you being able to find a way through, and it's just maybe just about following gravity. And that is something water does. Water will always find a way to the sea, isn't that right? And so that might be you. You will always find a way to realize your desires, or at least to get what you want. And so that is something to be, I think, very positive about. And also, if you do reach a situation where absolutely feels that nothing is moving, then Scorpio, you can, if you need to, I mean, you don't have to, but if you absolutely need to, you are able to really assert yourself today in a way that could be very dramatic, but you can do it. And you can almost be an explosive force that comes from nowhere. Maybe someone underestimates you. It's a bad idea to underestimate a Scorpio. Well, it's always a bad idea to underestimate a Scorpio, but today it's a particularly bad idea to underestimate you, because you really are able to make things happen in a big way, and you won't take kindly to obstacles. So, do have a positive view, and yeah, just about anything is possible within reason, and 9 times out of 10, the easy approach is going to be the right approach. But if things really are difficult, you know how to assert yourself. And because the moon is making a trine to Venus and a trine to Mars, that does indicate that as you move through the day and even into tomorrow, you should be quite well supported, and other people are not going to present too many problems, and the emphasis in most cases is going to be on cooperation. And as far as one-to-one relationships are concerned, there doesn't seem to be much effort needed in most cases. There's just a natural fluency that you have, with the people in your life, and in most cases, there's nothing much you have to do. You just have to be yourself, and emotionally you're pretty fluent, but also there's something about you that is actually quite exciting. You kind of give the impression that you've got a lot of tricks up your sleeve, that there's a lot that you have that you're not revealing, and so there is a sort of a buzz to you, and because of that, people are going to want to stay close to you. They're going to want to know about you, and it's not going to be difficult to pique other people's curiosity. So if you're trying to impress someone or trying to get someone onto your side, you just have to say a few words which just imply what you're capable of doing without necessarily revealing everything. So that is a social skill you have, and do make the most of it. Sagittarius, it's a day when you feel that there is a lot going on, but the question is, are you actually going to be able to be part of it? And the answer might be no, at least until late this evening, and that would be if you were in the Americas. So I think for most Sagittarians, you shouldn't feel that you necessarily have to do anything. I mean, I think that you can, if you really need to, have an impact, if something is important. But the question is, do you need to? And I think in most cases the answer is probably no. So in spite of the temptations, I think it's just important to hold your ground, because if you were to act too early, that might spoil things, and instead you should just make sure that you're happy and doing things that you want to do, and there's no pressure, and also nothing has to be revealed. It could well be, Sagittarius, that there are things that you're working on, things you're thinking about, and the cogs are slowly working and you're reaching conclusions, but you haven't got there yet. And so allow that to proceed. You're on the right tracks. So you shouldn't feel disappointed, or you shouldn't feel that things are too slow. I mean, after all, things are about to change. Sagittarius is a fire sign, and Sagittarians are arguably happiest when there are planets in fire signs. And the sun is still in Aries, and the fact that the sun is still in Aries, by the way, is perhaps encouraging you, or should be encouraging you, to really just concentrate on what you can do without feeling that you have to engage with other people. I don't think you do. Just concentrate on your creativity, while you've got the chance. Maybe while you're being undisturbed. That's a great thing about being undisturbed. You can do what's important to you. I hope you're being undisturbed, or if possible, you should. You really you don't need outside inputs. But as far as the fire is concerned, we have 2 sign changes coming up. We have Mercury about to move into Aries, Mercury moving into a fire sign, and that actually might happen this evening if you're, I think if you're in California, by the end of the day, Mercury might be in Aries. And then Mars is about to move into Leo. That's later in the week. So you've got 2 planets about to move into fire signs, and that's gonna really, really set you on fire. Could do. So that's really something to look forward to. But it hasn't happened yet. So Sagittarius, it's probably best that you wait it out, because you are on the verge of a change, but I don't think that change has happened quite yet. And also, one point about relationships, Mercury is about to move into a fire sign, and that may indicate that someone around you, close to you, is on the verge of making a change, and they're almost there. But as they're on the verge of a change, they just might not be ready to make decisions. They're still making up their mind. So it may not be just you who is feeling a little bit indecisive, but it may be some of the important people in your life as well. But it's going to change, and I think it's going to change for the better. Capricorn, one aspect we've got today is a semi-sextile between the Sun and Saturn. And this aspect between the Sun and Saturn, well, that might sound a bit obscure, semi-sextile. It's not usually regarded as a major aspect, but I do think it's important. And what that Sun-Saturn sextile is about, semi-sextile, because Sun and Saturn is 30 degrees apart, Sun in Aries, Saturn in Pisces. And so what this Sun semi-sextile is about is the principle of restriction. And the question is, who is restricting who? And I think in the case of this semi-sextile, it's possible that you are the restricting influence. There's something you might not want to happen, or there's something you're holding back on. And you have to ask yourself, what kind of impact are you having? And how do you occur to people? How do your members of your family, how are you occurring to them? And at the moment, you might actually be quite a heavy influence. Now, heavy doesn't mean bad, and it's quite serious, but it's not necessarily bad. But it could be difficult, and it could be too much of a good thing. So with Sun semi-sextile Saturn, you kind of have to work with the energies, and you have to bring together 2 things which, on the face of it, seem to be incompatible. The principle of doing what you like, taking the initiative, is not necessarily compatible, at least to begin with restraint and discipline. And with that Sun semi-sextile Saturn, if you're looking at it from an interpersonal perspective, you have the opportunity to be a restraining influence, but you can also be an encouraging influence, and you can encourage what is good in other people. And also you can learn from a process. At some level, maybe you should be doing something and you're just refusing to accept it. And maybe you see someone's actions and you see it as an example, and you see it as a threat. And it shouldn't be a threat. It should be an encouragement. And So maybe this, with this Sun semi-sextile Saturn, really, it may be that there's actually something that you need to be doing, and you've come up with all sorts of reasons why you shouldn't be doing it. But you do need to be honest with yourself, and it may be that now is the time to be doing something, and you shouldn't delay any further. Additionally, we have the Moon making a trine to Saturn, and Moon trine Saturn is an aspect which is quite socially orientated. It is talking about the social world, and at its best, Moon trine Saturn could give you an opportunity to really get on with people and to take advantage of the social opportunities. So if you are in a group, if you're with other people, things can move, and people are going to be attracted to you because Venus is close to Saturn, still close to Saturn. Venus is going to be conjunct Saturn for the rest of the month, and the Moon is making a trine to Saturn. So this really is a chance to get to know people, and perhaps you haven't bothered in the past, and perhaps there have been people you haven't talked to, and you maybe have stubbornly haven't talked to them, and now might be a time to talk to them. And if you don't talk to someone today, then tomorrow the situation might have changed. So while you have a chance, Capricorn, do discuss things, do talk to people. It's a great day for making introductions, and you never know what might happen. And if you and another person have found it difficult to communicate in the past, then with that Moon trine Saturn, and of course Venus conjunct Saturn, things can move. And so it's quite possible, Capricorn, that today might be a time when you can break a deadlock. And it may be just a deadlock that has been just holding things back, not just for you, not just for another person, but might have been holding things back from the group. And it is all about people getting on with each other and finding their common ground. And so do work on it if you have a chance from a social viewpoint, because right now, Capricorn, I think actually if you really make the effort, your social skills may actually be at the top of a range. Maybe get 5 stars out of 5. Aquarius, you and Capricorn do have things in common. I know as an Aquarius that you like to regard yourself as being completely unique, and of course you are completely unique, but you do share a ruling planet with Capricorn. Capricorn and Aquarius both have Saturn as their rulers, and today the Sun is semi-sextile Saturn. And when I was talking to Capricorn, I was mentioning this Sun semi-sextile Saturn, and I have to talk to you about Sun semi-sextile Saturn. I think that this aspect is relevant, and Saturn is you, and the Sun could very well be another person, and the reason for that is that the Sun rules Leo, and Leo is your opposite sign, and of course Saturn rules Aquarius. So you've got Sun semi-sextile Saturn, and that may say something about relationships. And the semi-sextile aspect, I regard it as being difficult, but not necessarily stressful. It's not in the same league as an opposition or a square or a semi-square or a sesquiquadrate. Semi-sextile is different. And so with Sun semi-sextile Saturn, we may be talking about the struggle to get on with another person who you may not 100% agree with, or they may just feel there to be a certain incompatibility. At least that's how it feels itself to be on the surface. So as you go through today, do consider all the people you have to deal with, at every level. Whether you're talking about someone you might be married to, or someone you might meet in the street for a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds. It's that whole gamut of relationships, and with Sun semi-sextile Saturn, you have to be accepting of another person's idiosyncrasies, and also in some cases you may have to be accepting of another person's rashness and impulsivity, because the Sun is in Aries, and so over the course of a day you might see people behaving in a way that seems impulsive, inappropriately so. At least that's maybe how it feels, and you may hear people saying things that you regard as being out of order or inappropriate, and you have to not jump to conclusions. It's very important to be tolerant and to accept people as they are, and not to overinterpret things. One can listen to what people are saying, you can watch what people are doing, and you can jump to conclusions, and you may be wrong, and you have to ask, why is someone saying what they're saying? Why are they doing it? And there's a lot of psychological theory about it, but I can't remember it at the moment. But you have to ask yourself, I can't even remember what it's called, but there's a question about whether someone's behavior is connected with who they are, or whether it's connected with the circumstances in which they find themselves. And that's a question you have to ask, and you mustn't reach firm conclusions, not today. And at the same time, you have to ask, what is good for you at this moment in time. And I think in many cases, it might be a time when you can bring people into your life, even if it's very temporary, who you don't necessarily agree with, or who you may find to be rather difficult, because there are benefits there. And additionally, you're perhaps being encouraged to look at a side to yourself that you don't normally take into account. Saturn in Pisces, sextile Sun in Aries. You are perhaps being reminded that maybe you need to be a little more impulsive, and perhaps you've been planning things too much, and sometimes you just have to act on the spur of a moment, and that's the only way to do it. And so if you have been a little bit stuck in the mud recently, then you're getting encouragement. But when you see that encouragement, your first impulse might be to reject it, or to regard it as just being another person's poor behavior. And that could be how you see it. And that aside, today the moon is still in Scorpio, and it's making a trine to Venus. It's making a trine to Saturn. So that's a good aspect. And Moon eventually makes a trine to Mars, and those lunar aspects do allow you to really make things happen and to get results. And as I suggested, a little bit of impulsiveness on your part might not go amiss. You might just have to do something to get things moving. But you are ambitious. You like you were yesterday. You have things you want to do, and I think you can get them, even in quite a material way. And if you're able to be sensitive, but also a little bit impulsive, then I think you'll find, Aquarius, that today things do move. And if there are things that you want, even if they are quite material, then I think there's every chance that you can get hold of them. Pisces. Pisces, there is a grand trine in water signs. The moon is moving through Scorpio. It's making a trine to Venus in Pisces and to Saturn in Pisces. And it's also making a trine to Mars in Cancer. So this grand trine in water signs, really, it's making things easy for you. And, being a Pisces, you're very familiar with the water element. So things can just happen, things can just move without you having to make much of an effort. Now, you might feel that you should be making an effort, that you want to make an effort, but in most cases, it's really not necessary. And if there's something you feel you want, then there's every chance that you can get it, that it will almost naturally come your way. It might even be like, being on a desert island, you're waiting for something to happen, and then it's just brought in by the tide, and it just gets washed up on the shores, and it's yours to just pick up. Yeah, it can be that kind of day. I don't want to exaggerate. You can't get everything, but whatever it is that you think is reasonable, that you reasonably feel that you should be able to get your hands on, you can get it. And it might very well be something material that you feel you want. And if you're not being over-ambitious, then you may be able to just get it without having to do anything dramatic. And so allow things to run their course, allow the universe to work things through, and it just may be the case that the less you resist, the less you struggle, the easier things become for you. Though, always, you have this opportunity to up the pace if you really feel it's necessary. You are a tough person. Venus is conjunct, particularly now with Venus making a conjunction to Saturn in your sign. So you are tough. You don't suffer fools gladly, but it's probably just unnecessary. There's no need, I don't think, to create drama. And additionally, Pisces, don't be complacent. Don't feel that you've got all the answers, that you can sort of close the book on your knowledge, because there's always new stuff you can learn. Especially today with this grand trine in water signs. Knowledge, information can just naturally come your way, and there's no need to feel challenged. You can just develop naturally. So if you thought you were coming to an answer, to a solution, and then some new information comes your way, you can just naturally incorporate it, and that will just make you more knowledgeable and better able to deal with future challenges. The moon, by the way, it's in late Scorpio, but it does move into Sagittarius tomorrow. In fact, I think it might move into Capricorn, move into Sagittarius this evening if you're in the Americas. And with a moon moving into Sagittarius, you're probably going to be more definite, more focused, and that might be a time when you really want to really move forward with some of your ambitions. But today you can take a more relaxed approach, and this relaxed approach is certainly going to help when it comes to other people. The moon is making a trine to Venus and making a trine to Saturn, and you've got this Venus-Saturn conjunction in your chart. And while it's true that you are in control, that you know how to handle yourself, you understand where your limits and boundaries are, still you can be very approachable if you want to be, and people are going to like you. But ideally you should be considering people who might have a slightly different view from your own, because they might present you with an approach that you hadn't really thought about. And when you do think about it, and when you start to analyze it, you may realize that it could actually be very useful. So Pisces, just be relaxed, be open-minded, and the day should everything should flow your way. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And I now want to look at today from the view of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 38, which is opposition. And this hexagram seems to contradict a lot of what I was saying for the 12 signs. When I was talking about the 12 signs, I was talking about how things were flowing. I talked about maybe a grand trine in water. And in general, I was quite optimistic. But opposition does indicate that us and other people may be talking at cross purposes, and we may feel a little bit alone because we're not on other people's wavelengths. There are a lot of people we just feel separate from them. And so this hexagram says a lot about the social side of things. And there are two moving lines here. And the bottom line, the fifth line, no, the top, and the sixth line, so the second from the top and the top line move. And these two moving lines are not bad. And what it is really saying is that we should not be jumping to conclusions. So we may start the day feeling that we are on our own, that other people don't understand us, the world doesn't understand us, that maybe things have happened in the past which have really shown how different we are, and that there are different attitudes. And one aspect we have got today, which maybe links with this hexagram, which I possibly should have emphasized more when I was going through the 12 signs, is an opposition between the moon and Uranus, and because the moon is in Scorpio and Uranus is in Taurus. And this opposition can be about people talking at cross purposes, people being very stubborn, being really into their view of the world. And how can you get compromise in that kind of situation? And that aspect might make us think there's really no point in trying. We're battling a world on our own. Or is there any point in battling? It's just the way it is. Now, the fifth line moves. Now, in the I Ching, fifth line tends to be quite fortunate. And with the fifth line moving, the I Ching talks about a wrapping. And we have misunderstood something, or we don't fully understand something because we haven't seen what's under the wrapping. And this might relate to another person. And when we take away the wrapping and we start to understand what someone is really like, then we get a different view. And we might then realize that we're actually dealing with someone who really can be helpful, that we may be on their wavelength after all. So if you're feeling that you are estranged, because Greg Winkup, in his translation of the I Ching with hexagram 38, he does talk about estrangement. And so if we are feeling estranged, then the fifth line indicates that it may be an illusion, that we're dealing with someone who actually is quite close to us. They can be an ally, but we haven't recognized them as an ally. And this becomes more intense with the sixth line. So the sixth line talks about completely misunderstanding another person, seeing someone as being, he talks about something like a cart full of devils, covered in mud. It's really, that's bad, that's how we see it, but that's not how it is. And so we might have a really negative view of a person, or it may be a situation, and we don't want anything to do with it, but we've misunderstood it, completely misunderstood it. And in fact, if we actually look at what's going on, we're dealing with a situation which is favourable, and we're dealing with people who can work for us rather than work against us, but we just don't recognise it. So if you are feeling today that you're on your own, that it's you against the rest of the world, then it's possible that you've misunderstood the situation, and people who you regard as being enemies, or at least as being unhelpful, may have something very real to offer, and they may actually be allies. Now, because we've got two moving lines, I think that does mean that we move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram 58, which is the joyous. And this might remind us that today there is a grand trine in water signs. We've got the moon in Scorpio, trine Venus and Saturn in Pisces, and the moon is also trine Mars in Cancer. And so that's a very emotional thing. And the joyous can be interpreted as quite an emotional hexagram, because you've got the top three lines and the bottom three lines, well, they're the same, but that is a trigram relating to the lake, so it's the lake over the lake, and so it is an aspect of water which is about emotion and is about flow, and so by the end of the day, there is the opportunity to enjoy oneself, to feel comfortable, to feel happy, but we shouldn't get caught up in it, because with the joyous, there's a slight danger that we get a little bit complacent and we forget what we're supposed to be doing. And another view of the joyous is that you've got to be firm. You don't want to be overwhelmed by the tide. You have to remember what you're supposed to be doing, what it's all about, and think about the task in hand. But that should be okay. So the overall message of the I Ching is don't allow first impressions to prejudice yourself against today, because things may not be as bad as they seem. In fact, people may not be as bad as they seem, and someone who seems a problem could actually be a friend or an ally. And now it's time to talk about Abraham Lincoln, because we've just had the 160th anniversary of his assassination. He was assassinated on April the 14th, 1865. And clearly Abraham Lincoln is an important person in American history. And so let's start by looking at his chart. He was born at sunrise. Apparently that's what it says in his biography, or how it was remembered in his family. And so where's his chart? Yeah, there's Abraham Lincoln. And so as far as the time of his birth is concerned, which is 6:54 a.m., that is the time of sunrise on February the 12th, 1809, in Hodgenville, Kentucky, where he was born. And so, because he's born at sunrise, he's a double Aquarius. And double Aquarius, you can think of all of the Aquarius connotations of independence, thinking about things differently, not necessarily following a crowd, being independent-minded. And his sun in Aquarius is trine his Mars in Libra, and so Sun trine Mars, you might say that's quite assertive. And if you take, that Mars, though, there is a question about what house that Mars is in. If you use Placidus, it's the eighth house, and so you could say, that Mars may be hinting about his eventual death and his very sort of public death. Or if you're using whole sign houses, then that Mars would be in the ninth house. And of course, the ninth house in astrology often has a connotation with the law, in particular the higher courts. I mean, the third house is more sort of magistrates' courts, lower courts. Ninth house is sort of higher courts. But that may say something about his legal career and the fact that he was a successful politician. A successful lawyer, and then a successful politician, and Neptune on the midheaven. I mean, Neptune on the midheaven. Now, this might represent Neptune at its highest level, because Neptune is idealistic, and he is giving himself over to a set of ideals. I mean, in his case, we think about Lincoln and the Civil War and the importance of getting rid of slavery. I am not, by the way, an expert on the Civil War or on 19th century American history, so forgive the generalizations. This is not an area of history that I know a great deal about. It's not something I studied at school. I remember, in fact, when I was 15, I was supposed to be in this class that was going to study American history, and I really didn't want to be in this class. I did not want to study American history because I knew what this course was about. I didn't want to do it, and I insisted on doing something else, and I was very persistent about it. Maybe I should have studied American history, but I've never formally studied American history, so I'm just warning you. Unless you count sort of Cold War history, when I was doing my degree in international relations, I did loads of 20th century American history about the Cold War and that kind of thing. But so I'm just warning you. This is not a subject that I necessarily know very much about. So Lincoln, he might be an Aquarius, but he had planets in Pisces. He had Mercury, Pluto, and Jupiter in Pisces, and Jupiter in Pisces can have very clear views about the way things should be. Jupiter is a moralistic planet. It does have a sense of right and wrong, and so Jupiter in Pisces in his Placidus first house, along with Mercury and Pluto. So Mercury and Pluto, again, if you are a lawyer or a politician, having a Mercury-Pluto conjunction in Pisces can be useful. It's about being able to communicate, knowing what your audience wants to hear, even though Mercury is in its fall in Pisces. Mercury in Pisces, it's not the greatest place for Mercury to be, but in Lincoln's case, it didn't seem to matter. He was an effective communicator, and he was an effective lawyer, and yes, he was an effective politician. But I don't want to spend, as I said, too much time looking at his natal chart. Now, particularly today, which is just after the 160th anniversary of his assassination, you want to think about why did he die when he died? By the way, I don't think that I'm going to come up with anything especially dramatic. Are there any signs of death in his chart? Just in his natal chart? Well, Mars in the 8th, but I don't find that particularly convincing, because 1 in 12 people have Mars in the 8th. So that's not so impressive. He does have Moon square Mars. So Moon square Mars is quite an aggressive combination. It's quite argumentative. And you could say that Moon in the 12th house in Capricorn, square Mars in Libra, both the Moon and Mars, by the way, are in their detriment, that Moon square Mars may point to the way he died. Could be. I mean, it could say that there might be something about his death that might catch people's attention. But it's his midpoints that give us some further information. And one midpoint that I really, really want to focus on relates to his his Aries point. So the Aries point is something we should always look at, particularly with a politician, because Abraham Lincoln is someone who had obviously a huge impact on the United States, and you could say on the world as well. And this freeing of slaves and going to war about it. So clearly, a lot of people's lives were impacted by Abraham Lincoln. Though I should say I'm not a proponent of the great man theory of history. As far as I'm concerned, if someone wasn't born, someone else would have taken his place. So I don't think we can say, if Abraham Lincoln had never been born, then you would not have had a civil war and you would not have had the freedom of the slaves at that particular time. I'm not convinced about that at all. Someone else would have been produced by the universe. And if you look at the midpoints, at his Aries point, one midpoint that I find to be very important, which I believe is very important, is Aries point on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So his Mars-Saturn midpoint is at 1419 Scorpio. So that means that he has got the Aries point is making a sesquiquadrate to his Mars-Saturn midpoint. And additionally, the Aries point is making a sesquiquadrate to his Mars-Hades midpoint. So he's got a hard aspect between Saturn and Hades, which Mars is picking up. So you can see this in his chart. There's Mars, and there's there's Saturn, and there's Hades. So with Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, so this is a midpoint that I actually find really interesting, and it's about what he can unleash. So whatever you think about Abraham Lincoln, he did unleash the Civil War, and that Civil War may have been the right thing to do. Sometimes these things have to happen, but as a result of the Civil War, a lot of people died, and it caused a huge amount of dislocation and suffering. I'm not saying that didn't have to happen, but that is the result, that is the reality of going to war and having Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint can be about, politicians who are either through their own desires or through just circumstances beyond their control, find themselves in a leadership of a country where a lot of people are dying. Adolf Hitler had Aries aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Vladimir Zelensky has Aries aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Vladimir Zelensky, in his case, by not going with the Istanbul agreements in 2022, is to a great extent is responsible for what's happening in Ukraine. And in the case of Ukraine, unlike Lincoln, Zelensky is losing his war, and as a result of what he's doing, a lot of people are dying. Victoria Nuland has Aries aspecting a Mars-Saturn midpoint, and Victoria Nuland was there in Kiev in 2014, encouraging the coup and talking about F the EU, whatever she said. So Victoria Nuland was someone who was very much responsible for what happened in Ukraine in 2014. She was the person on the ground, and as a result of what happened in 2014, a lot of people died. And someone born on the same day as Victoria Nuland is Princess Diana. And our Princess Diana had Aries aspecting a Mars-Saturn midpoint. Now, in her case, she wasn't a politician. Hundreds of thousands of people didn't die because of her, but she had a death that was very public. She's very much remembered for her death. And so Abraham Lincoln has that double connection. He has a relationship, to these politicians who are responsible, or not necessarily responsible, but are part of these wars where hundreds of thousands of people die, so that fits. But also his death, his assassination was noted. It was very public. He is partly remembered for his assassination in a theatre, and so you could say that having Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint and the Aries on the Mars-Hades midpoint, that sort of fits, doesn't it? And just remember, Aries is the global point. It's like you have to regard the Aries point as an escalation. So you start with the ascendant. The ascendant is about you and another person. The node is about you and the group. The Aries point is about you and the world. And so Aries on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, he's kind of he fulfilled the destiny of that on at two levels, through his public death and through his leadership in a war that was highly destructive. So I think that's something we need to say. He also has a hypothetical planet Kronos on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and quite closely on it. So there's Kronos, and Kronos opposition to Mars-Saturn midpoint. I think is it opposition? I'm not quite sure what it is, but he's certainly got. So let me just move this wheel to Kronos, which is a hypothetical planet to do with government, and there's Kronos, and so you can see Kronos is very closely to the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So Kronos on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. You could say that that says he as a government leader, as a president, it's about a president dying. That may be one way of looking at Kronos aspecting a Mars-Saturn midpoint. And it could be about the president initiating a very destructive war. Again, I'm not saying it wasn't wrong to start this war, but you cannot doubt the fact that a lot of people died and were dislocated as a result of the Civil War. So before I look at consider what before I consider why he might have died when he died. There are the hypothetical planets, by the way. So there's his Mars, there's his Saturn. So he's got his Mars-Saturn midpoint at around 15 Scorpio. There's his Kronos and there's his Kronos at 1425 Aquarius, which is so that's square his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So the question is, why did he die when he died? So one way of looking at this could be profections. Now, profections is a sort of Greek technique, sort of Hellenistic astrology. I'm not someone who really uses Hellenistic astrology very much. I mean, I'm aware of it. If I like a technique, I will use it. I've never had much success with zodiacal releasing, but I'm yet to be convinced. But annual profections as a Hellenistic technique is something one should look at. And so with annual profections, you have this sort of moving ascendant. So, he was born of Aquarius rising, so that covers the first year of his life. So the Aquarius ascending, so you go through, so it repeats every 12 years. So at 12, Aquarius and its ruler is important to him. And so likewise at 48 years old, Aquarius and its ruler would be important to him. Now he was assassinated on February the 12th, so that means that he had just turned 56. I think that's right. 65. 1965 minus 9. So he had just turned 56 when he was assassinated. So we count from the ascendant. So at 48, his perfected ascendant was at Aquarius. At 54, it was Leo. So he just switched into Libra, and so his year ruler would have been Venus, and so suddenly his Venus would have got a lot of focus, and so there's his Venus on the second house cusp. Of course, if you're using Hellenistic astrology, and you're using profections, you probably have to be consistent and use a whole sign house system. So if you use a whole sign house system, you could say, well, he's got Venus in the third house, but he's got Venus in Aries. Now, it is in its detriment in Aries, but it is in mutual reception to Mars, and so that mutual reception to Mars is helpful. I mean, certainly better for nothing, but still, that Venus may represent a certain vulnerability there. And then, and it's also Mars. If you're using a whole sign houses, Mars is opposition Venus, not by precise angles, but Mars is in an opposite sign to Venus. And so Mars could, in a general sense, represent the enemy, someone attacking him. I mean, he just sort of won the Civil War, but now Mars is activated. So the moment he turned 56 on February 12, 1865, that Mars opposition Venus became active, Mars opposition Venus by sign, and one certainly should have been looking at Venus and what Venus was actually doing in his chart, and maybe how it was transiting as well. So, turning to the actual assassination. So here is the assassination. Well, what I'll do is. So here's the assassination chart. So I make it, I don't know, I've read somewhere that it was 10:15 p.m. it was, but I put 10:13 p.m. This is the time when the shot was fired. It's not when he died, but it's when the shot was fired. And so there we have Mars in Cancer, and Jupiter was about to move into Capricorn, and Venus was on Algol. Now you might say that is relevant because Lincoln's annual ruler was Venus. So if you want to understand what that means, you might want to track Venus through the sky. And so when Venus was conjunct Algol, this fixed star which is connected with evil and death and bad things, so when Venus was on Algol, and of course it's on Algol pretty regularly, like every year, but perhaps it was particularly relevant to Abraham Lincoln when he turned 56, when he moved into a year that was ruled by Venus. Now, putting the charts side by side of his assassination and his Abraham Lincoln and his assassination. So there's his Venus, and when he was assassinated, Mars had just made an opposition to his Venus. So, again, he's going to have Mars square his Venus pretty regularly, but maybe while Venus is the annual ruler, that Mars square Venus becomes a very serious aspect. It could become an aspect that has the potential to kill him, especially as Neptune was in Aries, and he had Neptune moving close to his Venus. Again, that Neptune conjunct his Venus may not have been a big deal before he turned 56, but the moment he turned 56, then the malefic potential of that Neptune on his Venus may have started to make itself felt, and so Mars was certainly triggering it. So that might give us an indication about why he died when he died. And so Mars is Mars is opposition his Venus widely, but you've got other things hitting his Venus. So I think from a perspective of annual profections, we do get some hints there. And also Jupiter is at 2931 Sagittarius. So what is the relevance of that? Well, if Jupiter's at 2931 Sagittarius, that means it is square the Aries point. And so Abraham Lincoln has his Aries point on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So maybe Jupiter was triggering that Mars-Saturn midpoint approximately around the time he was assassinated. Another transit, by the way, he's got Saturn was transiting. Saturn was in Libra, so transiting Saturn was making an opposition to the sign Aries, where Venus is. So you could say sign by sign, Saturn was also hitting his Venus, and also transiting Saturn was pretty close to his Mars. And then there is Lincoln's inauguration chart. And this is where I wanted to think about the relationship between Trump and Lincoln. And so Lincoln was inaugurated. That's his. When did Lincoln become president? I've got his chart somewhere. I had it. Lincoln inauguration. Yeah, that's Lincoln's inauguration chart. So he was inaugurated on March the 4th, 1861 at noon. So remember, in the 19th century, presidents didn't get inaugurated on January the 20th. They got inaugurated on March the 4th. And so his inauguration chart, had Saturn quite close to the IC, and so that might suggest a few problems. And Sun, of course, at this time the Sun used to be January 20th. It was always at 0 degrees Aquarius. In the 19th century, the Sun was always around 14 degrees Pisces. So the thing about the inauguration chart is Neptune. Is the position of Neptune when he was inaugurated. So he was inaugurated when Neptune was at 28 degrees 30 Pisces. And so, Neptune was about to move into Aries when he was inaugurated. And you know what that means. If we look at Trump's inauguration, so here is Trump's inauguration. Neptune is at 29 degrees 9 Pisces. So both Trump and Abraham Lincoln were inaugurated as Neptune was moving towards the end of Pisces. And I think that this is really important for America. And so if we look at the United States' chart, if we take the 510 Sibley chart, so, the idea that you take 5:10 p.m. on July the 4th, 1776 as the beginning of America, the IC is at 1 degree 3 minutes Aries. So in both cases, the Trump inauguration and the Lincoln inauguration represent the beginning of a major upheaval in America, in the United States, that really basically gets to the absolute foundations of a republic. So that's your fourth house on that's your IC, that's your fourth house IC, and it's not just about America. Just a reminder about what was going on in other places. So, Bismarck was Bismarck, by the way, was appointed, I think, sort of main minister to the Kaiser. I'm not in Prussia on September the 23rd, 1832, just as Neptune had already gone into Aries. So Bismarck was appointed roughly at the same time as Lincoln became inaugurated. And so there's a link there. In fact, September the 23rd, 1862, when Bismarck got appointed, was the day after Lincoln made his Emancipation Declaration, which was during the Civil War, when Lincoln, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's something like that. If the Confederate States don't surrender, don't give in, then all the slaves there will be treated as being free. I think it's something like that, the Emancipation Declaration. So that happened within around 24 hours of Bismarck becoming effectively prime minister. I don't think that was what the title was called, but really started to hit the peak of his career when he got the key appointment. And of course, later he became Chancellor of Germany. So there's a link there with Germany. So with Lincoln, Lincoln's inauguration, he basically engineered the Civil War, and of course the Civil War happened shortly after his inauguration. The next month, sort of April the 12th, 1861, just a couple of days ago, we've had the anniversary of the start of the Civil War, when Neptune was still. Where's Neptune gone? Neptune was still in Pisces, so Neptune was sort of getting ready to move into Aries, and I do think that when we think about Trump and Trump's inauguration, what this is the beginning of, and you can see how Trump has really acted very quickly to dismantle the government and to fire people, really go for federal government, dismantling the Department of Education. Trump has basically launched a civil war shortly after becoming president, and this is exactly what Lincoln did, and it's all about Neptune in Aries, or Neptune about to move into Aries. Okay, Neptune hadn't quite gone into Aries when the American Civil War started, but it was getting there, and certainly by the time Lincoln launched his Emancipation Proclamation, the Civil War had started. So to make a connection between Trump and Lincoln is absolutely appropriate. Astrologically, they're dealing with the same thing, and you could say, in some ways, they're adopting the same approach. Lincoln, again, I'm not totally familiar with the history of the thing, but he was president when the Civil War started, and he wanted to resolve an issue through a civil war. And likewise, Trump is resolving an issue through a civil war. And this is a civil war that could take years. And this is not a civil war as in guns and artillery and all the other stuff. It's taking place at a different level, through government departments, through trying to stand up against the judiciary, whatever techniques Trump is doing to try to change American society. Now, we don't know whether Trump is going to win his civil war, and we've got getting on for 3.5 years before the next election. If he starts to win his civil war, then then I suppose Vance will become his replacement, and even if Trump doesn't make his term, Vance could take over. So it all depends. We don't know, but that's what Trump is doing, and I think that historically we can see it. So is Trump the best president since since Abraham Lincoln? Well, it depends on your view, doesn't it? I mean, obviously, if you're a progressive, if you're on the left, you are obviously going to regard Trump as the worst president that America has ever been. But there are people, including Trump, who regards himself as being on a par with Abraham Lincoln. And I think that when you're judging presidents, of course, you don't judge them on your own beliefs. You judge them on the basis of the results they get. And we don't know yet. But I'm just putting forward the possibility that if Trump gets away with it, whatever he's trying to do, if he really does change America in the way he's planning, then you could say that he will be up there with people like Abraham Lincoln and George Washington and Ronald Reagan. I don't know. I'm not convinced about Ronald Reagan, but you have to consider that possibility. But I'm trying to be objective. I'm not saying that I agree with what Trump is doing. You have to judge him by his success, not whether you believe he should be successful, whether you agree with what he's doing. But we'll have to see. And I just wanted to really say that, the jury's still out very much on whether Trump is the best president since Abraham Lincoln. But Trump certainly believes he is, I think. So that's it. That's all I've got to say for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.